Beginnings. Origin stories. We all have them. The foundation of who we are, each chapter building on the last, eventually culminating in a single scarred identity. Castlevania Lament of Innocence is a beautiful misstep. A story of love, ambition, and loss that would shape the series' soul and its shortcomings for the decade that followed. Capcom's legendary Devil May Cry hit store shelves back in 2001 and defined the 3D action genre. The Castlevania series had already made the transition to 3D on the Nintendo 64 with a mostly positive reception. By 2003, series director Koji Igarashi had returned to the franchise and planned to create the next generation of Castlevania games on Sony's PlayStation 2. Aria of Sorrow had released earlier that same year and is considered by many to be one of the greatest games in the series. Where that title took us into the future and the end of the timeline, Igarashi's new 3D title would instead serve as a prequel, set during the start of the Crusades in 1094, detailing the beginning of the centuries-long battle between the Belmont clan and the Dark Lord Dracula. At its heart, Lament of Innocence is a story about devotion, about love, and how easily it can turn to tragedy. Leon Belmont, a knight bound by faith and honor, is faced with an impossible choice when his beloved Sarah is taken by the vampire lord Walter Bernhard. His search leads him deep into a forest where sunlight never reaches, a place that feels forgotten by God. There, he meets Ronaldo Gandolfi, an aging alchemist who lives among the ruins. Ronaldo entrusts Leon with a whip imbued with alchemy, a weapon born of sacrifice and knowledge. Meanwhile, Leon's old comrade Matthias Krovankvist remains unseen, mourning the death of his wife. His grief weighs heavy over the story, shaping Leon's quest in ways neither man yet understands. Matthias is the soul of Castlevania's tragedy, the reminder that love and loss often walk hand in hand. By 2003, the PlayStation 2 was pushing games to new visual heights. Konami had already proven what it could do with Metal Gear Solid 2 and Silent Hill 3, both games being graphical showcases even to this very day. Lament of Innocence might not match their technical prowess, but its art direction and visual identity more than make up for it. It evokes that dark, gothic, Eastern European vibe that makes the series instantly recognizable. The transition from the PlayStation 1's pixel-based rendering to the full 3D rendering of the PlayStation 2 was done with masterful precision. Each area feels like it's been lifted from a classic Vania and rebuilt to show its full depth. Ayami Kojima also returns as character designer, and no exaggeration, Lament of Innocence may be some of her best work yet. The American box art is beautiful, and all the concept art and character portraits really solidified the style she brought in with Symphony of the Night. The transition from her character art to the models is also done relatively well. Alucard was iconic for his dark, aristocratic design, and almost mirroring Dracula himself. Here, Leon Belmont serves as the inverse. His bright white tailcoat and crimson accents contrast against the marble gloom of the castle. Kojima's vision gives him a sense of purity and individuality, a Belmont design that stands apart without leaning on Conan the Barbarian or the shonen hero trope. Still, nothing translates perfectly. The faces, for example, can look a little awkward. It's hard to take poor Leon seriously when he has the softest features in the room. The music was composed by series veteran Michiru Yamane, who took a slightly different approach this time around. Castlevania 64 soundtrack leaned heavily into atmosphere and ambiance. It fit the game's tone well enough, but it lacked the iconic melodic energy of the earlier entries. Lament of Innocence brings back that style in full force, though with a twist. The soundtrack feels far more upbeat, almost dance-like in places. Tracks like the Anti-Soul Mysteries Lab sound like they could belong in a gothic nightclub, with driving percussion and electronic undertones that somehow still feel distinctly Castlevania. Yet for all its energy, the soundtrack also finds its moments of restraint, shifting into the haunting ambient pieces that perfectly complement the castle's lonely halls. It's impressive how effortlessly the game moves between epic, adrenaline-pumping tracks back to eerie, atmospheric compositions. Castlevania Symphony of the Night redefined what most future entries in the series would look like. Detailed, expansive maps that encouraged exploration and rewarded players. Almost all the future 2D titles would follow this structure, with each one building on its foundation. Lament of Innocence does not feature an interconnected castle, instead opting for a small central hub that the player can travel to and from each area. It's a structure that makes Walter's castle feel less believable and cohesive, as it basically serves as a glorified stage selection screen. It's possible Igarashi wanted to merge the linear precision of the DMC games with Castlevania's world design, but this removes a lot of the tied progression and set structured path that the 2D games are mechanically designed around. The player can complete each area in any order they choose. There is a loose progression path, with some areas being more difficult than others, but the only goal is to defeat the boss in each area. Some stages contain blocked paths that require upgrades from others, which means the player will have to backtrack often if they don't end up choosing the stages in such a way that doesn't require them to do so. This doesn't really make the open-ended design of the castle feel more satisfying, it only ends up dragging the game's pacing to a halt. These stages aren't huge in scale, most take 30 minutes to an hour to fully complete the first time around, but paired with Leon's incredibly slow top speed and the monotonous maze-like level design, it actively and unintentionally discourages exploration in favor of clearing the stage as fair as possible. The switch from carefully designed linear levels from Castlevania 64 to the almost procedurally generated maps of Lament of Innocence really left me disappointed with how much of a slog it was to go through. Castlevania's core identity has always included platforming, and while it's been heavily reduced here, it does still exist. However, it becomes painfully obvious why the devs decided to limit the amount of platforming, and that can be attributed to the fixed camera. Some jumps are just incredibly difficult to make because of how the camera perceives depth. It may look like you jumped to the other side, but somehow you were actually too far to the left. There are a few rooms that are completely dark and require you to carefully observe the dimly lit platforms and jump across. But sometimes these can be damn near impossible to spot, and it just creates unnecessary frustration in an otherwise simple room. Besides combat, there is a bit of puzzle diversity in each stage, as usually you'll be required to find and complete an objective before you can face the stage boss, though none of these are clever or well thought out and usually amount to uncovering every part of the map just to pull a switch or two. The game tries to encourage some exploration with a set objective, though it ends up feeling sort of like the Tower of Ruin from Legacy of Darkness, which had intentionally repetitive level design. Symphony of the Night and even earlier Castlevania games do feature their share of hidden secrets that reward players who like to explore, and there is some of that DNA found in Lament of Innocence, often leading to a key item or even an optional boss fight. Some of these were actually pretty well hidden, and I'll give it some props for its creativity. These issues highlight a larger problem with Lament of Innocence, a lack of rhythm in its design. The game often struggles to make one challenge feel distinct from the next, both visually and mechanically. I gave massive praise to Lament of Innocence for its visual direction, but it quickly becomes repetitive and downright frustrating to look at. Each area has its own unique theme, an outdoor garden, a laboratory, and even a haunted theater. But for the most part, every room and hallway looks almost indistinguishable from the last. It all blends together, forcing the player to rely on the map far more than they should have to. The shallow, repetitive nature of the level design turns exploration into a chore when it really should be fun. Now, the map does do a decent enough job conveying direction, but the semi-fixed camera makes navigation disorienting, constantly forcing the player to pause and reorient themselves. A simple minimap could have completely remedied this. And speaking of interface design, Lament of Innocence's real-time menu selection might be one of its most irritating mechanics. In Symphony of the Night, pausing lets the player equip gear, use items, and view stats without pressure. Lament of Innocence replaces that with a live D-pad menu system, offering no way to pause and carefully choose what you need. It sounds like a minor change, but in practice, it's incredibly disruptive, especially during boss fights when you're scrambling to heal or use a recovery item. There's a reason From Software's games dedicate an entire button to healing. Lament forces you to take your eyes out the fight just to fumble through submenus, which kills the pacing and adds frustration to moments that should feel tense, not tedious. Devil May Cry and Onimusha were the only character action hack and slashes at the time, so it only makes sense for me to reference these games and how they made each encounter feel gratifying and really encourage player expression. Lament of Innocence's combat does try to replicate the success of its inspirations, but much like the other game mechanics, I found it to be pretty limited in player creativity. Each attack string is done by pressing a certain combination of buttons, and while you do unlock more combos as you progress, none of it ever really felt satisfying to pull off. There's just something about the way the enemies react in DMC that really makes each attack feel impactful, and even with the game's limited moveset, you always have a sense of control. Whereas here, the enemies feel more spongy and just not fun to fight. The whip's forward reach is fine, but it has limited horizontal sweep options, which makes it difficult to do any real crowd control. I found it was often better just to use the quickest and strongest attacks possible, rather than experimenting with combos, since the way the enemy AI behaves will usually interrupt them anyway. Lament of Innocence tries to add depth through its relic and orb systems, but neither ever reaches the potential they hint at. In theory, combining different orbs with each subweapon should create a wide range of elemental attacks and encourage players to experiment. But in practice, most combinations feel redundant, and only a handful of them are actually useful. The game gives you the tools for a flexible combat system, but it never builds encounters that demand or reward that flexibility. The relic system suffers from the same problem. You unlock items that should meaningfully change combat or exploration, temporary buffs, defensive abilities, utility skills. But few of them feel impactful enough to matter. They often drain MP too quickly, don't synergize with Leon's kit, or just simply go underused because the standard attacks get the job done much more efficiently. Instead of enhancing the core mechanics, relics and orbs end up feeling scraps from a deeper design that never fully came together. When you start the game, you only have the Whip of Alchemy, but as you explore the castle, you can find 3 elemental whips. Some enemies and bosses even have weaknesses you can exploit. The problem is once you obtain a vampire killer near the end, there's almost no reason to switch whips anymore. Lament of Innocence also lacks any kind of experience or leveling system, which creates an unexpected side effect. Since the combat is so shallow and the simplest attack strings work on nearly every enemy, there is very little incentive to fight anything you don't have to. Most encounters can be avoided with no real consequence, and skipping enemies rarely makes the game harder. Without progression tied to combat, the moment-to-moment fights just start to feel like obstacles, and it exposes how limited the system really is. The game wants you to engage with its mechanics, but it never gives you a meaningful reason to do so. The enemy variety here is your typical Castlevania fare, though unfortunately there's little difference in how the player actually deals with each one. Some take more hits than others, and there are a few standouts here like the ghost face things or these piranha plant guys, which require more strategic positioning, but most enemies can be taken out just by standing at a safe distance and spamming attack. I can thankfully say they did not skimp out on the bosses here, they're all actually pretty fun to fight. The first boss in the garden is simple enough, and most of its attacks can be easily dodged. Later bosses like the Succubus and Medusa have much more varied attack patterns and are a considerable step up from Castlevania 64's puny subpar boss offerings. As Leon makes his way through the game, he'll often have short exchanges with the boss characters, usually offering bits of backstory or fragments of lore that add some much needed personality to the world. The Succubus encounter is notable for giving Ronaldo some actual backstory. Here we learn Ronaldo created the Whip of Alchemy to destroy his own daughter, who had succumbed to vampirism after being taken by Walter. In an act of mercy and tragedy, he ended her life with the very weapon he forged. Then he went after Walter to seek revenge, only to learn the whip had no effect on him at all. It's a devastating detail, and it really reframes Ronaldo's character entirely. Up to that point, he doesn't have much of an identity. He mostly serves as a guide for Leon and a delivery system for exposition. But learning the fate of his daughter suddenly gives all of his actions a tragic weight. It mirrors the entire narrative in a way that feels intentional. A father losing his child to Walter's cruelty. A grief so deep it drives him into obsession. And a man who keeps going, not out of hope, because he has nothing left. Then there's the boss of the Dark Palace of Waterfalls, Joachim, a vampire knight imprisoned by Walter.
My name is Joachim Armstead. It's too bad you aren't Walter.
Joachim is one of the more intriguing characters in the game, not because he's noble or sympathetic, but because he isn't. He's openly selfish, openly ambitious, and makes no attempt to hide his desire to overthrow Walter and claim the Crimson Stone for himself, the MacGuffin that grants his wielder dominion over the vampire kind. He's the complete inverse of Leon. They share the same immediate goal, to reach Walter and put an end to his tyranny, but for an entirely different reason. Leon fights out of love and devotion. Joachim fights out of pride and hunger for power. It's the clearest example of how Lament of Innocence quietly paints parallel paths, one born from sacrifice and the other from ego. His entire existence itself is a warning. The castle destroys those who enter with selfish intent. Joachim is a showcase of how Lament uses its bosses to explore different responses to loss and purpose. He represents ambition without love, power without meaning. Leon is willing to sacrifice himself for someone else. Joachim is willing to sacrifice anyone to advance himself. The castle rejects that kind of motivation. It does not empower him. It consumes him. Joachim shows that strength in this world comes from devotion, not domination. His boss fight is also one of the more entertaining ones. It genuinely feels like something that could have come out of a Devil May Cry game. Joachim fights with a ring of floating sword that shifts between offense and defense, and he mixes fast lunges with wide sweeping attacks that force the player to stay immobile. It is one of the few encounters in the game that actually tests Leon's movement and spacing. What makes this fight stand out is how controlled it feels. The patterns are readable, the arena is clean, and the rhythm of dodging and striking finally matches the kind of momentum the combat system seems built for. Even though Joachim's personality is defined by ambition and arrogance, his fight is precise and surprisingly technical. Compared to the slower, sponge-like enemies of the rest of the castle, this battle feels like the developers finally had the clarity to design and counter around Leon's strengths. It's almost ironic that one of the best fights in the game comes from a character who exists to represent failure. He feels like a warrior who could have been Leon's equal if he had walked a different path. After Leon clears the 5 main areas of the castle, the final door in the castle's center opens and reveals Walter at last.
Welcome to my castle. Pleased to meet you. I am the master of the castle, Walter Bernhard.
Walter immediately mocks Leon, treating his entire journey as nothing more than entertainment. He confirms that he does indeed have Sarah, and takes twisted pleasure in showing Leon how helpless the situation really is. Leon attempts to strike Walter with the Joachim whip, but just as Ronaldo warned, it has no effect. Walter barely reacts, almost amused that Leon would believe it would work. He returns Sarah to Leon without hesitation, treating her like a discarded plaything, and tells him to meet him atop the castle. Leon brings Sarah to Ronaldo, hoping for help, but the barrier around the alchemist's home stops her in her place. The magic only reacts to that to one thing. Ronaldo explains the truth Leon has been trying not to face. Sarah has been infected by Walter, and her time is running out. Ronaldo then explains the only thing that can be done. The whip of alchemy is powerful, but it's incomplete. To defeat Walter, it needs a human essence strong enough to purify it. And Sarah understands this before Leon does. She knows the curse inside her cannot be stopped. She knows she does not have much time left. Rather than let her life end as another one of Walter's victims, she chooses to give her remaining strength to Leon's cause. Sarah asks Leon to use the whip on her. It is an impossible request, and one that breaks him completely, but it is the only way forward. The ritual frees her soul and turns the whip into its true form, the Vampire Killer, a weapon that carries both her spirit and her final act of devotion. For Leon, this moment becomes the heart of his entire character. The Pagoda of the Misty Moon serves as the game's final challenge, and it's unfortunately one of the smallest and most visually repetitive areas. Finally reaching the top of the keep, Leon confronts Walter for the last time. Walter welcomes Leon with the same smug arrogance he's carried through the whole game, but the moment Leon lashes out with a fully awakened vampire killer, Walter is actually shocked. The whip hurts him. Hard. By gifting Sarah to Leon like some kind of prize, he unintentionally created the very weapon that can kill him. It works narratively, but it definitely makes Walter look like an idiot. You're telling me the ancient vampire mastermind didn't know this enchantment was possible? Before the fight starts, Leon drops the single hardest line in the game.
But I am beloved by the night. You will taste my powers.
I'll kill you and the knight!
Interesting.
This line is so full of that early cheesy video game voice acting and has no reason to go this hard, but it does. The Walter boss fight plays a lot like classic Dracula. He teleports around, tosses a few slow-moving projectiles, and generally feels more theatrical than threatening. It ends up being a little anticlimactic. The game talks him up as this legendary vampire lord, but you barely see him until the ending, and when he finally shows up, he feels almost cartoonishly evil. The dramatic voice, the all-red outfit, the smug monologuing. It all makes him feel weirdly generic for someone who's supposed to be the big bad of the entire Belmont lineage. Yet, Walter is not the true antagonist. His defeat only clears the stage for the character who's been silently shaping the story all along, Matthias. Death appears the moment Walter falls, claiming his soul and sealing it inside the Crimson Stone. He reveals that he orchestrated everything that led to this moment. Walter's arrogance, Sarah's kidnapping, Leon's journey through the castle. All of it was engineered to ensure Leon would defeat Walter and leave his soul vulnerable. Matthias knew Leon's resolve would harden when Sarah was taken from him, and he used that grief to achieve the power he sought. Matthias then asked Leon to join him, urging him to embrace their shared suffering and abandon the god who allowed their loved ones to die. But Leon refuses. Instead of breaking, he stands firm. There are a lot of people who dislike that twist, but I think it actually works. Leon is visibly heartbroken, having now lost two people he cared for, and the voice acting really leans into that theatrical tragedy in a way that fits the tone of the story. Matthias, on the other hand, he barely appears in the game outside the opening narration, yet he comes across as someone who has completely given up on the god he once served. His grief has curdled into bitterness, and for a moment you almost understand him. In rejecting his humanity, Matthias takes his first step toward the name history will know him by, Dracula. The final boss of the game is none other than Death himself. Some players were disappointed that you never actually fight Matthias, but I think the omission is intentional. The game wants the betrayal to linger. Facing Matthias immediately would offer too much closure. Instead, the story forces both Leon and the player to sit with the weight of what just happened, letting the anger and heartbreak settle before the true battle begins. Death is a very cinematic fight and probably one of the most challenging in the game, but once you learn his patterns, he becomes manageable. His attacks are flashy and aggressive, but they follow a clear rhythm, and with enough patience, Leon eventually overpowers him and seals him away. With Death defeated, the castle finally falls silent. Leon steps out into the night, carrying the weight of everything he's lost. Sarah is gone, and Matthias has abandoned his humanity, but Leon refuses to let despair break him. When Death taunts him about Matthias' new power, Leon makes his stance clear. He swears that as long as the Belmont name exists, they will stand against Matthias and anyone who follows in his path. It is the first declaration of the Belmont lineage, the moment a grieving knight becomes the founder of a legacy that will echo through every Castlevania game that follows. Lament of Innocence features a hidden challenge mode that most players never see, the Forgotten One. This fight is locked behind a post-game dungeon known as the Forgotten One's prison, and it is easily the toughest encounter in the entire game. The Forgotten One is a massive, grotesque demon chained in a series of chambers, each fight escalating in scale and brutality. It feels closer to something out of a Souls title than a PS2-era Castlevania game, and for once the game drops its theatrical villains and goes straight for something ancient and monstrous. What makes this boss memorable is not just the difficulty, but the tone. The prison is bleak, oppressive, and stripped of the castle's usual elegance. Mechanically, the fight pushes the whip's range and Leon's movement to their limits, testing spacing and timing in a way the main campaign rarely does. It's optional, it's cruel, and it stands out as one of Lament's few moments of genuine spectacle. Lament of Innocence also includes a few unlockable extras to add some much needed replay value. Clearing the game unlocks Joachim mode, which lets you play as Joachim himself. It's a surprisingly fun twist, giving you access to his floating swords and turning the game into more of a precision-based glass cannon experience. His movement and attacks feel completely different from Leon, and for many people it ends up being more interesting than the main combat system. There is also Pumpkin Mode, a humorous bonus character who fights with a comically oversized whip and exaggerated stats. I couldn't be bothered to play the game on Joachim mode, so I cannot tell you what I think of this, but it's a pretty silly addition and actually reminds me of the Tofu guy from Resident Evil 2. Castlevania Lament of Innocence is a game about beginnings. As an origin story to one of the most iconic video game franchises of all time, it carries a weight that its mechanics sometimes struggle to match. The level design isn't the strongest, and its combat feels like a pale imitation of the games that did the formula better, but at its core, it is a worthy entry and a sincere attempt at blending character action with a tragic, heartfelt story. As a Castlevania game, I can't say I had an unforgettable experience. Even creating this video was difficult at times because I don't have any strong feelings towards it, good or bad. Lament of Innocence is competent, sometimes beautiful, occasionally frustrating, and rarely exceptional. It lacks the defining vision that makes something like Symphony of the Night stand out. But even so, it succeeds at being the one thing it needed to do. It gives the Belmonts a beginning worth remembering. Thank you all so very much for watching my retrospective on Castlevania Lament of Innocence. This one took me a lot of time to put together, and the support you've all shown me lately has been unreal. Hitting 1,000 subscribers this early is something I never expected, and I am genuinely grateful. Thank you all so much. Thank you for watching, commenting, sharing the videos, everything. You're helping this channel turn into something I am really proud of. If you missed my Castlevania 64 and Legacy of Darkness breakdown, you can find that right here. And if you found the channel through the Halo Combat Evolved analysis, I appreciate you sticking around. Your support means a lot. Also, if you want to support the channel even further, I now have channel memberships available. You'll get early access to new videos, behind the scenes posts, and your name featured at the end of each video. Totally optional, but it really helps as these projects get bigger. Next time, I will be jumping into Halo 2, one of the most iconic and ambitious sequels ever made, and I cannot wait to share that one with you. I will see you all in the next video. Bye-bye!